Okay, I want to read you an email. And in this email, I think it contains a great question. Again, I think it's a question for Christians we should be willing to ask. I think it's a question for Christians that the answer and the subsequent questions may be really, 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 truly beneficial and beautiful for us. And I'm not going to read the entirety of the email. I'm going to read sort of what I gather to be what I think was the meat of it. First, let me state that I'm not a Christian. I mention that because I acknowledge that being a non-Christian, I may have certain biases in my understanding. On the other hand, I am familiar with the Bible as a literature major. Very good. Many geological eons ago. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. The academia is the academia. I would like your response on 2 points. Here's first point. How was the crucifixion and resurrection a sacrifice in any way? Well, let's focus on the crucifixion. The resurrection, I've never heard the resurrection described as a sacrifice. But the crucifixion, how is the crucifixion a sacrifice in any way? Now, here's the points that I think are really important. Jesus was God before his incarnation. He sacrificed himself over rules he made and refused to change, was crucified and resurrected, and ascended to heaven, and got to be God for eternity again. Okay. Now, the author of the email references Matt Delahunty several times in it. He says, Matt put it this way, was not a sacrifice, but rather a bad weekend in the space of eternity. Yeah. Okay. I can see his point, the author says. Sure. When a sacrifice is made, you give up something of value and don't get it back. So how was what Jesus did a sacrifice? Now, this is the question we're gonna talk about today. The other question is about heaven and hell. This is the one I really want to address today, just for the sake. Maybe we can come back to it later on, but just for the sake of this conversation, how was the crucifixion of sacrifice? If Jesus was God, and Jesus understood what was about to happen, i.e., he would be resurrected, and Jesus understood that after the resurrection, he would ascend and take his place on the throne. And how is this a sacrifice? Why do we call it a sacrifice? Well, chiefly, it was a sacrifice from our perspective. Okay? That's the first part of this, is that we use the word sacrifice, but you're right. The crucifixion was not really a sacrifice as we might know it, especially from God's perspective, right? God is paying the price because of the rules that God created, and as you say, God refused to change. Yeah. So just change the rules, man. It'd be so much easier if you just change the rules. Well, can't change the rules. Why? Because the rules are good, and the rules matter, and the rules are perfect. It is Rabbi Kushner who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. In the very first chapter of this, I still remember it because it was powerful. It meant a lot to me. What Kushner describes is that God set the world in motion and then let it be in motion. God set physics, chemistry, biology. He set all the rules that govern our physical lives and our spiritual lives. He set those in motion. God set those in motion, and it was good. So there's no reason to change the rules. The rules work. However, because of sin, because of imperfections, because we miss the mark, and because of God's desire to be present to us, and for us to be in relationship with God, and for God to be in relationship with us, and all the other ways we normally put it, the price had to be paid. Now, I know we're getting into that whole blood price thing. We use the term from the human perspective. We say, "Oh, Jesus sacrificed. Jesus gave up his life for us on the cross for our sins." It was a sacrifice in the same way that we remember making those blood sacrifices on altars later on. Okay? We take the calf, we take whatever the sacrifice might be, and we destroy this being, we destroy this creature in an effort to appease an angry God. Jesus dying on the cross that day is for us God sacrificing as we would sacrifice to appease that angry God. But the crucifixion, as you point out, accurately point out, it doesn't satisfy the definition of sacrifice at all. First, it's not our sacrifice. See, when we sacrifice something, it's, as you point out again in the email, very good email, by the way, we give up something that we never give back. We never get back. Jesus wasn't my sacrifice. I never gave up anything at all. So I can't claim Jesus was a sacrifice for me. Not really. I can't, because I didn't lose anything. I didn't give anything up. All I am is just the recipient of the benefits of said sacrifice. So how was it a sacrifice then for God? Especially if God, especially if God understood how this whole thing was going to roll out. Even there, I would say, I don't think it meets the definition of the word sacrifice. Not really. It's more like the end game. It's more like this is the final move. This is the last piece. This is the last piece falling into place. I think it's the language. We somehow gravitate to the language. Maybe the language has a gravitas to it, right? There's a certain depth to it. There's a certain power to the language. Oh, he sacrificed. Well, again, as you say, it might have been it would have been painful. It probably, we know from reading the scriptures that Jesus wasn't looking forward to it. We know in the scriptures that Jesus would have preferred going a different direction. But we also know from the scriptures, Jesus, he sort of alludes to the idea. He says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so too will the Son of Man be lifted up. So there is that sense that Jesus had at least an inclining that 3 days later he would be raised up. That 3 days later he would be raised up, and that life would continue. Something would continue after that. So again, I would challenge, and I don't think I would challenge the argument. I would say, no, you're right. I don't think it measures up. I don't think it satisfies the definition, our definition of sacrifice, because God understood what was going to transpire, what the cost was, what the reward was, and now in the end, God was going to recoup all that was given. God was going to get that back. That being said, that's from that godly perspective. You may want to look at, okay, let's take Jesus then as God. Jesus as God. Well, did Jesus know that he was God? Jesus speaks about God the Father, my Father in heaven. Yeah, sure, some of his language is there. Sometimes his language sort of alludes to his understanding that he understands his divine nature, right? He understands that there's a divinity about him, but he isn't too keen on jumping into saying, I am God. That's certainly not something that he does. Jesus prays to a God that exists outside of him, at least publicly when he's with his disciples, when he's among a crowd. He prays to a God that is external from himself. He doesn't say, Jesus, I thank you for Jesus. He doesn't speak about himself in that way. Again, he does allude to some kind of knowledge of what's going to transpire in the future. I don't know if that means he absolutely understands exactly what it's going to be, but he does know that he's going to suffer. He does seem to understand that he will suffer greatly and die. So perhaps if we're going to if we're going to stay with the word sacrifice, looking at it from Jesus's perspective, I think what I might challenge is to say the idea that Jesus understood exactly who he was spiritually, exactly his entire divine nature. I don't know if I would be 100% comfortable in saying, yep, no, he understood. He was part two of the Trinity, right? I don't know if that would be a safe thing for me to say. I don't know how much I would agree with that. I think Jesus had an idea of who he was, but not necessarily the entirety of the concept. He had concepts of a plan. I think Jesus understood that he is someone special, something special, but I don't know if he had that full godlike power and knowledge here in this world. So when he was approaching that time of his crucifixion, he was experiencing a great deal of anxiety. Again, just from the gospel recordings, he didn't march up, go, you do what you like, boys. I know I'm getting out of this in 3 days. That wasn't a part of it. As a matter of fact, when he's hanging on the cross and he has that conversation with one of the criminals. What does he see? He doesn't say, yeah, listen, boys, don't worry about it. 3 days, we're out of here. No, what he says is, tonight you will be with me in heaven. So we might wonder, did Jesus think this was the end for him? So I guess all I'm saying is, when it comes to the idea of sacrifice, how can we call it a sacrifice, given everything that you described? And again, I do appreciate what you described. I think if anyone in this story could say there was could say there was sacrifice, it would be Jesus. I agree with you. I don't think God could say, God sacrificed his son. I hate that language. And for us, I don't think it's fair for us to say, oh, the sacrifice was made for us. Maybe from the Jesus perspective. But the person who could say that I have offered sacrifice is Jesus. Because I would say, I don't think he fully understood that he would be raised again. I don't think he fully understood his divinity. I don't think he fully understood he was God. I don't think he fully understood how things were going to unfold. If he did, then the anxiety and the trepidation that he was experiencing doesn't seem to fit. That anxiety, that trepidation, those prayers to say, hey man, listen, if you can take this cup from me, I'd really appreciate it. If there's another way about this to get the same thing, let's do it. I think, though, to me, those are really good indicators that he understood what was going to happen to him. He didn't necessarily understand how it was going to unfold later on. And he did fully understand how much this was going to hurt and how much pain he was going to go through and how he was going to suffer. He would have seen crucifixions his entire life. He would have known how the Romans do things. He would have known how the Romans handle these kinds of matters. He would have known that he would have been beaten and tortured. He would have known that he's going to hang on this cross until his lungs filled up with blood, until he suffocated. He would have known that this was going to be a moment of intense shame for his family and for himself and for his family within the community. He knew, again, he prays for his followers. He knew that they were going to be next. After his death, they would be next. He prays, God, take care of my flock. Take care of the boys. Don't let nothing bad happen to them. So I think Jesus went into that moment. I think Jesus went into that moment willing to be sacrificed. I think he went into that moment knowing that I think he went into that moment prepared to sacrifice his life so that God's plan could come to fulfillment. We don't necessarily have to agree with what that plan was. I'm not even entirely certain we all understand exactly what that plan was, but I think we can say, I am comfortable saying that Jesus carried his cross, that Jesus hung there, that when Jesus went to the garden, he understood what was going to be asked of him, and he was willing to pay that price. He was willing to make the sacrifice of his own life in order for God's plan to come to fruition. I hope that helps somewhat. That offers some kind of understanding. But again, for everybody else out there, I hope you were able to hear me reading this email, and allow yourself to ask these questions, because they are incredibly beneficial. They're incredibly beneficial to our faith. If we can't deal with questions like this, then our faith might be a little too rigid. And things that are rigid have a tendency to snap when the winds get high. Anyhow, amen.